is Mr. Blaise Noto as a guest on the Barton edition. Thank you for joining us on the show, Mr.
Oh, you're welcome,
Blaise.
Lisa. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
And well, just to start talking about, what brought you here as a visiting professor, to Barton College, and what other feats you've had in your career before getting to this place?
Okay, well, I moved here 3 years ago from Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for 9 years. And before that, I worked in the film business for about 28 years. I rose through the ranks. I became Executive Vice President of Worldwide Publicity at Paramount Pictures. Then there became a point where I just reached my limit, and I could go on of more and more, but I decided I wanted to kind of shift priorities a little bit. So what I did was I opened my own business, my own marketing communications business. I moved to Hawaii. I always wanted to live there, and I did a lot of work in Southeast Asia. But while I was at Paramount, I handled all the different publicity campaigns for their movies. I've handled about 400 campaigns, in my career. And I was in charge of mounting the PR campaign for all of their movies, doing their Academy Awards campaigns. And also I had a big department. I mean, I had about 150 people that would report to me at any one time. So some of the films I worked on Titanic, I worked on Braveheart, I worked on Forrest Gump. I handled 5 of the Star Trek movies. I worked on Mission Impossible 1 and 2. And I've even done things like the Rugrats movies,
Okay.
South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and even smaller films. I worked for a while with Dino De Laurentiis when he built the studios in Wilmington. At that time, it was called the DEG Studio. So we had filmed there King Kong Lives, we filmed Manhunter, we filmed Blue Velvet, we filmed a number of movies there. And Dino loved North Carolina. At that time, he brought a lot of people. They were doing a lot of modeling work, like on King Kong. It wasn't really CGI work. So he brought a lot of people from England over to teach people in North Carolina how to create models at that time to create special effects work. So I worked with Dino for about 2 years, and I moved back and forth every two weeks in Wilmington, 2 weeks in Los Angeles. And then finally segued over to Paramount, which I actually liked. It was the place that I wanted to be at, and I kind of grew up, and not only did I handle the movie side of it, but I also handled corporate, which is a whole different animal. I handled corporate for the studio. So anytime there was any problems with Paramount or any publicity that had to do with the chairman, I would be involved in that as well. So needless to say, it was a very demanding job. I did it, and then I decided I just want to do something different. So that's when I moved.
That's very interesting. And I do understand that you were a sociology major, I believe, in your bachelor's.
Yeah, there was no such thing as communications at that point. There was no such thing as marketing. If you were involved in marketing, that meant they were going to fire you because they didn't know where to put you.
Yeah.
So I studied, I went to a school at Wesleyan University, which is a small college in Connecticut, and I basically did my own major. What I really wanted to do was really to try to have an education that gave me a lot of different experiences, because I wanted to get into communication in some way, and what I initially wanted to do was to work in developing countries. I took a lot of things: photography, visual anthropology, psychology, sociology, art, music, and I also did studio art. I'm a horrible artist, but I went to London for a semester, studied clay sculpting and figure drawing. Horrible, but a great experience. And over there I did some work at the BBC, which was actually really interesting. And also, when I went to college, I had my own radio show. At that time it was the 70s, so you could really play about a 20-minute song and then, have a coffee or kind of relax a bit and then, get into the show. So it was actually really good. From there, I went to graduate school and got a scholarship to the Annenberg School of Communication, which was at University of Pennsylvania. Studied documentary film. I was a teaching assistant to a man named Amos Vogel, who was very big in underground and independent films. And at that point, I didn't know where to go. It was a time where there weren't a lot of jobs. I ended up with a small little company, but a very prominent company called United Artists. I worked in Times Square in New York. And at that time, we handled films like Woody Allen's Annie Hall and Rocky, You know, it was a really kind of a big heyday with them. And then after that, I moved to Boston, handled PR in Boston, in New England, then moved to California and stayed and just kind of moved up the ranks in California.
So a lot of moving around, and it's such an interesting journey that you've had from, you know, these big Paramount films and other great renowned films. But you said you believe that you needed to get your priorities. And what has that journey kind of been like for you?
You know, it's been good because I think what you have to take a few things and you have to look at them in terms of how important they are in your life. You know, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about college was the experience of it. Not so much, I like the learning of it. I like learning new and different things. That's one of the reasons I like teaching, because I learn about things. But to me, that was really what it became about, was I took courses like American Indian vocal music. I also played the gamelan, the Javanese gamelan for 2 years. And where could you get experiences like that? And I think that helped me not to be afraid of things, to be more open about different cultures, different people. And that kind of went over and into my adulthood. You know, when I left, I moved to Maui, and people thought I was crazy, you know. And from there, I said, well, I'm closer to Japan than I am to, you know, Los Angeles. Let's start going to Southeast Asia. So I went there, not knowing a soul. I set up a film festival through Skype with Cambodia.
Wow.
So before I moved here, I had launched a film festival with a friend of mine. It's called the Angkor Wat International Film Festival, Angkor Wat in Siem Reap, Cambodia, and it's still going on today. I think it's in its 4th year or whatever. I also worked with an organization that deals with children that they kind of save from the garbage heaps. And I sponsor a little girl over there who's now 19. She's going to college next year, and she was basically rescued when she was 12 from the garbage dumps. You know, and I shot films in China. I taught in China. I taught at the Beijing Film Academy. I taught marketing and PR there, which was interesting because it was all done through a translator. So I have no clue what I said is what everybody understood. And did a movie in the far western part of China near Pakistan called The Kite Runner. So it really was nice because I got a whole different set of experiences. You know, then there was a point where I said, all right, time to move on. Looked to see where I wanted to move. I wanted to move to a place that still had a lot of vibrancy to it, where I could then start to teach. So I looked and I moved to the Triangle area, and here I am.
Well, another very important thing is that you acquired so much knowledge from so many different experiences. And I guess we could say that you have a lot of information literacy, but also a lot of information fluency, where everything that you've learned, you could apply to something else. So what were some experiences that you had that maybe something that you learned in the past that you never thought, oh, this helped me in my teaching career now?
Well, I think one of it is when you travel. Traveling is the best thing for anybody. I mean, I used to use one part of my brain when I worked in corporate America, and that was always, what are they going to do? How am I going to get in trouble? You know, how do I get out of this? What's going to, you know, that always problem solving part of the brain. And then I would go on vacation to places where I had no clue where I was going, where they didn't speak the language, I didn't understand the language, I couldn't read the street signs, because there was another part of my brain that started to work. And what happened, it also let me feel very confident about my sense of discovery, my sense of exploration, and also that I had the intuition. You realize you have a certain amount of street sense. You know, when I lived in New York in the 70s, you had to have street sense, street smarts, because you'd walk down the block, you go, should I really be walking down that block or should I take a detour? You just know from living there. New York in the 70s, I think it was 74, 76 was pretty rough at that particular point. You know, so you started to develop that kind of sense of there's something else in me that I have to kind of go towards. So when I would go to Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam, I actually went to Vietnam before, just as it was starting to open to Westerners, and I traveled alone, you know. So it was really fascinating. For example, my tour guide was my age, and he was a North Vietnamese soldier. And it was a really a wonderful experience, a learning experience, to be with somebody who I could have been shooting at, or he could have been shooting at me. We were the same age. You know,
Yeah.
And then experience a culture who basically says there was no animosity. It became, well, you just picked the wrong side, you know, or going into the American war crimes room and seeing a bunch of kids from a Hanoi school that wanted to embrace you because you're an American and they wanted to know about stuff. So it gives you a different idea of who we are and who they are, you know, who's an enemy and who's not an enemy. So it opens up your eyes to things and it allows you to throw away those preconceived notions that you have. So it's part of an education experience. So that's what traveling, I think, is really important. It opens up your eyes and makes you less afraid of other people and other ideas.
Another thing that I've heard you say a lot, you've traveled to a lot of countries with what we would consider Eastern culture, and we're in the Western culture. So what are some of those differences, you know, that you saw specifically in your field from Western culture and Eastern culture? You
know, I'm not a religious person, but I'm kind of a spiritual person. And one of the countries that I really have an affinity for is Thailand, because it's a mix of different cultures. It's a very it's a Buddhist society, but also it's a very gentle society, you know, and it's really interesting to go to a place that's total helter-skelter. You know, it stinks, it's crowded, it's hot, you sweat, and you feel totally alive, you know, because of the people, you know. And then you'll go and you'll go to other places and you'll just be surprised by people. One of the things that affected me the most when I went to Phnom Penh, where a friend of mine, and again, somebody who's a hero of mine, he was president of 20th Century Fox International Marketing, and he went to Phnom Penh and went to see the garbage dump in a place called Strong Mon Che. It's about the size of about 4 football fields, about 100 feet high. We climbed into there, and it was disgusting, you know. And these kids were living in poverty, you know. Was trying to go through garbage to get a few pennies for rice, you know. And you meet these children who are just so destitute. And then you go to the school where he's been working with them, and there's such an amazing spirit that they have, you know. And you realize it brings you to know about children, their resilience. They're much more resilient than older people are. You know, like I said, the little girl that I sponsored was 12 years old. She was a garbage picker. She had a first grade education. And now she's ready to go to college next year, which is remarkable for in what, 7 years, do 12 years of schooling and be able to get into college. So it's just that resiliency of children, the resiliency of other people from other countries. You know, we have lessons to kind of learn from that.
Correct. And how do you convey that to your students, whether it be, you know, internationally, whether it be in the Eastern culture or the Western culture, those ideas that you have and those concepts that are important and those values, how do you convey those to your students?
Well, I think part of what it is to have students think critically, you know, not accept what they see at face value, because we look at things at face value, we're afraid of it, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. You know, you look at people, when you look at these little kids, they're filthy, they're dirty, they smell in the garbage dumps, and then you see them a year later, and they're bright and they're cheery. One of the things you asked that really affected me was when I went to Cambodian Children's Fund. I went there one day and looked in the nursery, and there was a little girl, kids were coloring, and they colored in the lines, and this little girl had a black crayon, and she was just scribbling like crazy. I said to my friend Scott, what happened? He said, she just came here. She's filled with anger and rage. And then you see the other kids, how they've changed from that particular point, you know? There was another day that I went in, and there was a little baby that they brought in who was dying. She was 6 months old. Her muscles had atrophied, you know? And that's because the people there weren't educated. They were giving her sugar water thinking that was going to help her, and they kept her in a hammock, you know? She couldn't keep any liquids down, and she died. And then there was a little boy who had an infected leg, and he went home. They sent these kids back to be with their parents, and the parents went and amputated his leg over the weekend. So you look at that stuff and you go, oh my God, you know, there's a world out there that is very cruel, but there's people that rise above it. So what I try to impart is not those direct experiences, but more of, you know, take what you learn and learn how to use it practically. And learn how to look at the world, and not the way people tell you about it, but the way you start to find out about it, and experience the world that particular way. You know, because it can be cruel, it can be wonderful, and you meet a lot of interesting people along the way.
Another thing that's very important in your teaching experience, I believe, is the fact that, you know, you thought for yourself and you collected all these ideas and all this knowledge, but you're teaching others to impart that as well, and also help other people while doing that as well. You're telling us that traveling opens up your world. And what would you say to a student that maybe is afraid to go out and explore the world through, whether it be their career, whether it be any sort of way?
You just have to get over it. You know, I grew up in a working class neighborhood. My father owned a junkyard, and my mother was a housewife. Politically incorrect now, but that's what they call women who stayed at home. They were housewives, you know. And, you know, I would have been stuck in that kind of culture. But for some reason, there was something inside of me that I said, I don't belong here. I don't dismiss it, but I don't belong here. I need to do something a little bit different. And you have to find that thing inside yourself that says, I can do it. And early in my career in college, there was an incident that happened that everybody was telling me I couldn't do something. And it became monumental. And then all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I can do it, and I'm going to show you. I hated school so much at the first year that I was going to transfer. And when I went to high school, I wanted to go to Cornell. And my guidance counselor said, you're never going to get in Cornell. You're just not going to do it. You're from New York. Everybody applies. You're not going to get in. So I went to Wesleyan. It was a totally different experience. It was at that point just when co-ed. It was a gentleman's college. I didn't quite fit in. I came from a working class neighborhood. And I hated it. So I decided I'm going to transfer to Cornell. And my dean goes, oh boy, are you you're never going to get in. You're a freshman, first semester transfer. You're never going to get in. I got in, and then I rejected them. And I went back to my dean, and he said, I knew you were going to do that. I just knew you were going to do that. I had to prove something. I had to prove something that I'm saying I don't belong in this place because I don't fit in with who these people are. And then everybody told me I couldn't go to the place that I wanted to go to. And I got in now the place that I wanted to go to, and everybody told me I couldn't get into it. Now I don't want to go to it. I want to go to the place now where they tell me that I shouldn't be, I felt I shouldn't be at.
Yeah.
I ended up doing great. I ended up being president of my class. So a lot of that really has to do with where do you find that thing in yourself where you say that I can do it and have the confidence that you can, even though everybody is telling you can't. That's difficult. But what I try to give with the students is something that they can actually feel confident, that they don't just believe what people tell them, they go below the surface and start to form their opinions for themselves. And if they have a different opinion than I do and they have a sound reasoning and purpose, I'd love them to tell me I'm wrong. You know, that makes me, if a student does that and researches and tells me I'm wrong, I'm very happy.
I feel like
sometimes.
I feel like an overlying theme that we've gone over today is kind of like how education makes a big difference. And
Right.
like you said, whether it be the kids in Cambodia or, you know, students here, the education is definitely a key difference that sets you apart from a lot of other people that may have not had that education.
It does, and the level of experiences that you have. You know, if you have, I think I might have told you a story, my friend Tim was a very good friend of mine. He came from a long line of families, Harvard graduates, Harvard Law School graduates. And I was out there on the football field, you know, powwowing. We had Navajo dance and song, you know, and it was a big bonfire built out there. Remember, it was the 60s and the late 70s, mid 70s, so you had wine and some other things going on at that point in the middle of the football field. And Tim came to me and he said, your parents must be really pissed off at you that you're wasting their money. And I said, wasting their money? I'm learning a lot. The people that I met through that experience and the culture that I met, I wouldn't have had the same experience personally if I was doing something different. He felt pressured and that he had to be a lawyer, and because he didn't get into Harvard, he got into Boston College Law School, which is still terrific. He felt he was a failure. On mine, I was doing things that I really felt that were making me a different kind of person and enriching who I was. And for the field I wanted to go in, little did I know it was a good thing to do, because you meet all different kinds of people, you have all different kind of experiences with those people, and you have to be open to it and not afraid to try something a little different.
Well, thank you for all your insight and for joining us on the show. And thank you to our audience. We'll see you next time on the Barton Edition.